What's your emergency?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place to discuss all public information-related topics for police, fire, EMS, and local and federal government organizations.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose, and when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
Wow, here we are in 2024. This is the 4th season of the PIO podcast. Thank you to all our previous guests over the prior 3 seasons. You have truly made the PIO podcast a great success. For this year, I've already lined up some great guests, so sit back and enjoy today's guest.
Good afternoon. Today on the PIO podcast, we have Senior Public Information Officer Jesse Carr from the Dallas Police Department. Thank you for being on the show.
Robert, thanks for having me. I am thrilled to be here. Been a fan for a long time.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. You know, I want to say this first of all. Thank you for your service. I happen to see that you're a highly decorated U.S. Marine. Hoorah!
Hoorah! Yeah, I don't know. Highly decorated might be generous, but I've been in the Marine Corps Reserve for 10 years.
Well, I have family that serves and currently, and they're not Marines, but they do serve our country, and I always give kudos to those people that do serve and take their time out to protect our fine country.
Well,
so Jesse, I have a question though. Is Melinda still with you guys?
Melinda is. Yep, she's still in our office.
Yeah, I interviewed her a while ago, and it was specifically about the TikTok she does for recruiting, which I thought really neat. And that was how that's how I got the attention to the department, was because you guys do some really innovative stuff.
Yeah. She does a good job with TikTok, and trying to be creative, definitely in that space. And that's something that with me coming on board here that I'm looking at as far as our social and kind of what our reach is, and then trying to be very intentional in how we're trying to reach our community.
And we're going to get into all that detail. So let's get the demographic stuff out of the way first of all. How long have you been with Dallas PD?
I have been going on 2 months.
Okay, so you are new as new can be.
Absolutely.
So that's got to be interesting.
It is.
And we'll get into all those details.
Yeah.
What is the current manpower breakdown, sworn to civilian, and the population of the city, if you know it?
Yeah, so depends on day of the week that we pull those numbers. But for sworn, we are right around just over 3,000, anywhere from 3,000 to maybe 3,100 plus. And then our non-sworn staff is around the 500 to 600 mark.
Wow. And what's the population currently in Dallas?
Yeah, the
roughly?
Population is right about 1.3 million.
So you guys are what, number 5 in the nation, population-wise?
Not quite. I think we're the 9th largest. So we should be about I think we're the 3rd largest in Texas, 9th largest in the country.
And still growing.
Oh, and still growing.
As a population.
And that's interesting when you talk Dallas. It's funny because a lot of people will say Dallas. What they actually mean is like the greater metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth, North Texas area. But that's the size, for the city of Dallas proper. That's the size and still growing.
Yep. I know, it's amazing. I had looked at, I interviewed with Austin PD for the PIO position several years ago, and I ended up having to pass on it because of some other jobs and opportunities that came up closer to home, which was better. But so let me ask this: you worked somewhere else before this, right?
I did. I was with a much smaller agency, working in higher ed. As a police officer, I was a sergeant with the police department there.
So you went from a sergeant's position at a higher ed university, I'm assuming, and then you end up in this current position. So let's talk about that. How did you get into the current position?
That's a great question. Well, a long process. Where I was before, I was with Southern Methodist University, so I was there for just under 10 years. So I think that the shortest answer that I will tell you as a pitch as a PIO is I started to become involved in IACP's PIO section, and started to make connections with other PIOs across the country. Ironically enough, one of those is my current boss now. However, at the time when we met, I think this was in 2020, she was with another agency in a completely different state. And so if you had told me at that time, hey, in 3 years from now, you're going to be working for Kristen in Dallas, I would have laughed at you and been like, yeah, there's no way. What? And so that's sort of how kind of how that connection was made. Just a lot of, just professional networking that was really facilitated, through that PIO section. But obviously, for me at that point, I had to make the decision of, okay, I'm doing PIO stuff in addition to several other duties with a smaller agency. But I really wanted to go somewhere where I could do very PIO focused work. Obviously, the challenges with a major city agency in comparison to an institution of higher education are very different. Challenges are different. The busyness is way different. And so I made that decision to, okay, I'm going to, make this move to where I can do more PIO focus, still in policing, but with obviously less of a police role for myself, because I came over here as non-sworn professional staff.
And let me say this: you cannot undervalue connection space and networking. There is so much value in reaching out to colleagues in all across the country to connect. That's kind of one of the reasons why I started this podcast, was to connect with other people and learn what they do and put my name out there. When I retired from sworn work back in 2020, I started the podcast as a way to keep my name out there and engage with the public information communications field. So that's kind of the way I wanted to make sure I stayed connected, and networking, it does matter.
Yeah, no, it does. And what's interesting about that is the networking is incredibly important. But I will also say, and I mean, as a pitch for any PIO professional organization, specifically IACP's PIO section, yes, the professional networking and those connections are great from that standpoint, but the level of guidance and mentorship and experience that I got access to through that. I mean, now, not only do I have very, very close friends, but oh my gosh, I have so many people that I could reach out to and do reach out to for, hey, what do you do as far as this goes? What kind of advice, how do you do this? Yep. That kind of thing.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about that as we go. How is your office currently staffed for your unit?
Yeah, so we are blessed in that we have a decent sized team. So we have an assistant director of communications who reports directly to the chief of police. That's my boss, Kristen Lauman. And then within our media relations unit, we have 5 sworn staff. Then we have myself, and then we have 3 non-sworn, 2 of which are multimedia video specialists, and then we have kind of like a multimedia / graphics specialist as well. Okay, so you have a journalism degree from SMU, and so how do you think that contributed to your success in becoming a PIO? Oh, immensely. I think an easy way to put it is, and a lot of people appreciate this, is, when you're a PIO, you're basically just a journalist, but for policing. It's not all of it is completely the same, but there's a lot of similarities. And that was my real, I ironically enough started to get involved in PIO stuff when I was still in high school. I was doing the, FEMA basic PIO course and the, PIO awareness. And, but having that understanding in journalism, actually going out and doing the interviewing, putting together packages, doing, print stories for broadcasts, sitting at an anchor desk and doing the news and things like that. It gave me a lot of perspective. I mean, it gave me perspective of, okay, this is the important components of a news story. These are the kind of questions and things that they're looking to hit. But then it also gave me a pretty good foundation of, how to communicate, how to write things. And then just the familiarity and being comfortable being on camera, talking publicly, and things like that.
And the nice thing about it, you have a law enforcement background. So coming into the field, some of the technical stuff or the jargon, it makes it easier for you to translate into people speak as opposed to cop speak.
Oh, yeah.
You have a much better understanding of it.
Yeah. So when, you're out there and somebody says something about B-roll and you're like, prior to, if I had not gotten my undergrad in journalism, somebody would have said B-roll. And I was like, what is that? Are we going to go roll around? Like what? I don't know. I have no idea what that is, but
Right. Exactly. All right. So Jesse, let's talk about like specific stuff. So there were some things that I caught in when I research everybody before I interview them. So one of the things I came across was some things that you had talked about at some other presentations you did. And one of them was about social media strategies. So let's start talking about some specifics there, and then we're jumping to engagement strategies, okay?
Yeah, so big on strategies. I think strategies are important, especially in our role. And, it is a challenge because you look at strategy and there may be similarities, but it's also going to depend on your city size, your agency size, and things like that. One of the things that we've been looking at here and that I've been trying to focus on as I came on board is how does our strategy mesh with our vision and our brand image and then our branding as a department? Because, I would also say, while strategy is important, it's equally important to have a clear brand, a clear branding guide, and then a vision that goes hand in hand. Because, prior to, I came from a place where I built the PIO position and then I was a one-person shop. So if anything was being communicated on social media or in any manner, I was the one communicating that. So I could set that tone and it would be the same type of conversation no matter what. Obviously, in this environment, when I have a team and there could be, somebody posting on social media could be one of the six of us, it's very important that we make sure that even down to the wording that we're using, the language that we're using, is very clear to all of us, and we're keeping in mind that brand image and our goal and then that vision. And so I've been really focusing on trying to tie that into our strategy, down to, hey, how are we posting things? What are we posting? And then obviously a big component, and I know we'll talk about this in engagement, but a big component of that strategy is knowing your science. And in this context, when I say science, I mean looking at the data and the analytics and the numbers, and making sure, because that will impact your goal as well. I mean, I talk about this a lot in that I believe it's more important to reach your community versus going viral.
Oh my God, yes, please. I mean, that's the whole purpose of what we're doing is communicating with our community. If you're worried about going viral, I mean, that is not the way to go. And,
you're right. And there's so many times I think we catch these virals of policing or law enforcement agencies. And, then my number one question is, awesome, you went viral, but how much of your community did you reach? And now I will say, like, kind of as a devil's advocate for that I've been working in with part of our strategy here in Dallas that we have to keep in mind is, depending on the size of your agency and where you're located geographically, you do have to consider that viral component because, like take Dallas, for instance, about 1.3 million residents, but we have millions and millions of visitors and tourists every year. And so my strategy, taking that into account, is our brand image and going viral an important component? Well, it's not the most important, but based on the amount of people that we have visit the city of Dallas and interact with Dallas police officers, it's still a factor because we're pulling in so many people throughout the world and so many people across the country that are coming into our city. So I can't, I will always say that engagement of your city is more important than going viral. But I do think kind of the larger your agency, where you're at, the amount of tourists, events that you're having, sometimes that going viral and being seen more is an important component, because some of those people that see that will be visiting your city once that year or maybe twice.
Yeah, but the goal is not to plan to go viral. I'm trying to make this go viral. I mean, if it's organic and it's good, it's going to go viral anyways. You don't need to worry about trying to force it.
Absolutely.
So, all right, so let's talk about engagement strategies. How are you coordinating your social media into engagement where you're connecting with the people in the community?
Yeah, so the challenge with that is trying to make sure that we're active. We've had a really interesting conversation in our office when we talk strategy and engagement over the last couple of weeks of, okay, what is our community? What do they want to see? Which I think is always the challenge for any agency is, how are you putting out content that your community cares about? And I'll give you an example, and I won't talk on this too much because I would say that I'm probably 30% through this process, but part of coming on board here, one thing I've really tried to do is take that deep scientific dive at our platforms, what's effective, what is getting traction, what gets traction really well on X versus on Instagram, and versus Facebook Meta, and really trying to look at those numbers. And so an example would be kind of for our community, I love PSAs. I love short 30-second PSA videos. Personally, for Jesse, they're one of my favorite things. Well, I'll tell you one thing I've learned in 2 months is that's not necessarily the most effective tool for us to communicate with our community. And the numbers show that. Like it's proof. It's not just, hey, I don't like the style that we did here with this one. No, like we're watching, we had one the other day. It did very mediocre, but when you really look at it, for instance, only 0.2% or 2% of people that watched the PSA watched the full 28 seconds. Everybody else was exiting out after like 12 seconds.
And you wonder if that's because there's so many PSAs out there on social now, and and you're competing against other organizations and that put PSAs out. People get burned out, and I think part of that also is the generation that we're in with social, where your attention span is now 6.5 seconds. With the whole TikTok push now for video and the Instagram Reels and all that other fun stuff, it's hard to find that. You got to think 10 seconds maybe. Yeah. As an engagement.
You absolutely do. And that's the nature of the job. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to do things that are different and kind of find your own creative space. And then again, at the end of the day, it all goes back to, what does your community care about seeing? And you have to have those conversations, and depending upon your size, whether you have them with your team or you have them with your command staff, or you have them even better, you look at the numbers, but then you also talk to your community engagement officers. Hey, what do people care about? What's important? Because some of those will be similar, but it's also going to be different with every agency.
Have you done any kind of surveys online with the residents or with people via your social media platforms?
No,
to try and identify that? We
haven't. And that is definitely something that I would consider. I will say that I just as a team, I think we were able to collectively come up with what we think that is. Some of that, too, I mean, it's not necessarily quantifiable, but looking at comments that people make, whether it's replies to something, comments on Facebook, comments on Instagram, whatever. And you can kind of, and you know this, you can kind of generally get a sense of what it is people are looking for. And for us, what we're starting to the force of gravity we're centering ourselves around right now is, hey, we believe people in our community want to see our officers doing their job. So while some of the other things and maybe the more playful or fun things might work in other agencies and are important, our community cares about us. They're happy that we're here, but they also care that we're doing our job. Like, they want to see our staff out there doing their job, and that's what we're seeing be more receptive on social media and things like that.
Let's take a quick break.
I think it would be useful at least to experiment, and I know some universities have started to experiment with this, but experiment with having, a required course maybe for all students entering the university. They used to have a course at my university, which was like here's how to go to college class, here's how to study and things like that. They don't have that course anymore, but instead of having something like that, have a course that show students, here's the history of free speech, here's how it.
Okay. All right. So let's shift this to the other side of it, advertising. A lot of public sector agencies don't really do it, but in this day and age where we're fighting for manpower and to replace staffing, and do you guys have an actual advertising strategy and a budget to go with it?
I would say sort of. There are some certain things that we advertise. Obviously, recruiting is probably the biggest. I wouldn't say that it's a major component of what we do necessarily. It's obviously something that we consider and we look at. You bring up recruiting, and that's an interesting. It's a good thing to bring up with, because as I think a lot of PIOs across the country are seeing recruiting recruiting and retention are becoming one of those things that's magically appeared as a duty and responsibility for PIOs. So looking at those challenges of how do you do that? And in some cases, I think advertising is important, and it does work, and you need to have that budget. I don't necessarily, I think it also needs to be targeted. Sometimes I don't necessarily, like going and burning through your budget to boost posts and advertise, on Facebook may not always necessarily be most effective. And one of the things with that we've started doing is being really targeted. So some of the advertising we do, locally with some of our professional sports teams, and then also our recruiting team travels to recruit, whether it's to universities or other major cities, and then doing targeted campaigns along the lines of that. So it's kind of multifaceted. So it's not just, hey, we're just randomly advertising that we're hiring. Hey, we're advertising, hey, Chicago, we are coming to Chicago. We're coming to this place. We are hiring. Right. Stop by and see us.
That's good. I mean, and that's probably your best way of doing it. Like you said, boosting on Facebook is not necessarily going to grab the type of person that you want to come to the department. The demographic, the age group may not be the right group for Facebook, and then the other one's X. Right now, that's a crapshoot as it is right now. So, I sorry, Elon. I tried to get him on here. I wanted to talk about it, but he still won't. He won't answer my messages. But it's true. It's like we're trying to figure out the best way to reach out to that demographic that's going to fit into our agency and what our vision for our agency is. And it's tough. So you've got to be smart about your advertising dollar, because otherwise you're just throwing money down the tubes.
Absolutely. $5
at a time, right?
Yeah, and then it's just a waste.
Right. All right, so switch again here. Let's go to analytics. You brought this up, and I know this is a big part of something that you believe. How do you track your analytics? Are you looking at the native programs for the analytics, or are you paying for one of the platforms that actually looks at your analytics and breaks it down?
So right now, I'm looking at organic to the platform. With the city of Dallas, we use critical mention, obviously not the same thing as analytics, but we track critical mention. We use Archive Social. I haven't gotten into utilizing Archive Social to look at our analytics, because right now I'm primarily the only, all I'm looking at is X, Instagram, and Meta. And so I'm pulling those myself and looking at them individually, mainly because I'm trying to do it very slowly and very thoroughly, to really try to get a sense of who we're reaching and what are we reaching. And kind of my anticipation with this project as a whole, tying in strategy and engagement and then into analytics is, realizing this is coming up with the branding, the vision, the messaging, knowing who you're reaching. You can't do that overnight. My timeline is probably 8 to 12 months. So that in 12 months, I can sit in front of my boss, Kristen, I can sit in front of our chief, and I can say, hey, look, this is what we know for a fact. We know that we're reaching this percentage of people from our community. This is the age group that we're reaching on these platforms. We know that we no longer do PSAs because they don't reach anybody. And we have to figure out a different way to communicate our message creatively. And so I'm pulling that organically. And then, I have a separate way through Excel that I'm documenting all of that and tracking. And Robert, when I tell you slowly and thoroughly, I am even down to looking at our growth and figuring out exactly, because I want to be able to every single month look at how we're growing. And then also, this may be a little overzealous of me, but even figuring out based on the month and the time of year, if there's any deviation in our content and our success.
Mm-hmm. Let's face it, we have to be very strategic about everything nowadays. And I think that if you're looking at, I'm going to go a whole year and gather all this data to be able to figure out trends, and because there's a lot of factors that go into who pays attention to what. I mean, here, football games in town, of major events in town, a major incident that happens in town, all have impacts on your social and the connection that you have with your community. So if you're not tracking it, how are you going to know what's effective at that time, other than you went viral because something big happened in town?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's that part's one of the blessings of being at a larger agency. Obviously before, when we talk analytics, I think it becomes a little bit of a challenge the smaller you are, yes, and how you're reaching. And that's, where that strategy has to change. Obviously for us, we have such a reach on, like my count of last week, we have 270,000 plus on Facebook. We're at almost 37,000 on Instagram, and then almost 375,000 on X. So I'm going to have more to look at when I talk analytics and things like that versus, before, when it was like, oh, we have 700 followers on X and 1,000 followers on Facebook. That's going to be a little bit harder to nail down. But it is a blessing when you're with a larger agency and you have more of that reach. And then you have a lot of diversity and uniqueness in some of the things that your agency is doing.
Oh, you just brought something up I wanted to ask. Do you guys are you running any platforms that are in other languages, like Spanish or anything like that?
We are. So we have a Spanish Facebook, Spanish Twitter, and Spanish Instagram that we operate. So one of our priorities that we have with our office is we have a bilingual PIO. She regularly gives, she'll regularly give comments in Spanish or do interviews in Spanish. And then any of our primary stuff, she translates and is posted on our Spanish platforms as well. We haven't kind of made the move into any other languages just based on our demographics. But I could absolutely, see that happening. Now, what's interesting that you have to realize what that is, culturally, all of that's going to be different. And so Jennifer's our Spanish speaking PIO, and I had a conversation with her a couple weeks ago because, if you look, we can identify all this strategy and all these analytical things for our reach, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the same for our Spanish speaking Facebook.
No.
Just because we put it on our flagship English Facebook doesn't mean that that's going to carry over and be identical. And sometimes, messaging with other communities in other languages, if X and Instagram and Facebook are our top 3 platforms, communicating with them may not even be one of those 3. It might be something totally different.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, it could be like if you think about some of the agencies have a lot of Chinese in their community. I think of Chris Yoon out west in California. The WeChat is a big thing. They use WeChat out there quite a bit because that's the platform that their community uses. So, yeah, absolutely. You might not be using your standard X or, I'm back in Chicago now, so we have a lot of Polish here. Telegram is now starting to become an area where a lot of agencies now are starting to look, because I found this out years ago, but the Polish population in the Metro Chicago area is the largest Polish population outside of Poland.
Wow.
So it's bigger than any other major city outside of Poland. It's incredible. I mean, hundreds and thousands. There's probably easily 700,000 or 800,000 Polish people in this area.
That's amazing.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about transparency and having that strong social media strategy. How does that aid your transparency?
Well, it definitely ties back into our branding and our vision and our communication. But ultimately, it aids transparency in that you're hitting your target audience and you're communicating with your community. Transparency is obviously something that is very important. It's important for the agency. As we know, though, it's equally important for the community, and it's something that the community cares about. I would be willing to bet anywhere in the country. That's definitely a priority for our community here in Dallas. But that being said, if our transparency efforts don't align with our communication efforts, and likewise, it doesn't matter how transparent we are if we're not communicating that with our community.
Mm-hmm. And they want that.
Oh, absolutely. It's very interesting in it, and I love it. I was in a meeting listening to Chief Garcia, our chief of police, talk the other day, and he brought up a great point of something that I love with the city of Dallas, in that our community wants us here, our community cares about us being here, so they care about that transparency. And it's not that they expect us to be perfect and for there not to be mistakes or anything like that, but they want the transparency, and then they want the communication, and they want that transparency communicated. And so obviously along those lines, there's a responsibility on executive level leadership to create an environment where transparency is a priority. And then as that trickles down to us in media relations, we have to have a communication strategy that is clearly aligned and ties into that transparency to allow that facilitation to happen. And so we have to, tie that into all these things that we've already talked about, our strategy, our vision, our engagement, to make sure that we can communicate that transparency and then reach our community.
Absolutely. All right, Jesse. So is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
Oh, man, that's tough. I don't really think so. I think it's, when I think about this and any of these topics, it's, I pretend that I'm not myself and I'm another PIO listening to this and trying to learn something new or get some sort of new perspective. And so, I mean, I think, maybe just we touched on it a little, just, the difference of going from a smaller agency where I'm a one-person shop and trying to figure out, all right, now that I have a team and I'm with a major agency, what are some of the differences, but also what's still applicable? And so really just encouraging PIOs to, figure out how to apply those things that may be applicable to them, but also realize it's going to be different for everyone, and to be willing to take that step to accept that it will be different and then embrace it, and don't try to force someone else's strategy or perspective into how you communicate with your community.
That's a great way of summing it up. All right, Jesse, some rapid fire questions, all right?
All right.
Texting or talking?
Oh, I'm a millennial. Texting. Don't call me on the phone. And if you're going to call me on the phone, you better give me a text that gives me a heads up of what you want to talk about.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla. Don't like chocolate at all.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Adult drink of choice?
Tequila.
What would be your superpower if you could have one?
Man, I looked at this the other day and that I could fly.
I like that one. Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Beg for forgiveness all day long.
PIO's way. Favorite sport and team?
Oh, got the tattoo. Dallas Mavericks.
Nice. Place you most want to travel to?
Oh my gosh. Oh, Italy.
Italy. Excellent. What part?
Definitely somewhere on the coast. I went to Europe for the first time this summer, so got to see a lot. Nice. And definitely want to make Italy be on the coast and
go to the Amalfi Coast.
Yes.
Oh, they're beautiful. If you could have coffee with any historical figure, living or dead, who would it be?
Robert, I am a history nerd, so this is probably the hardest question you've asked me all day long. I'm going to go with Winston Churchill because I love the history of World War I and World War II. I do a random fact that is applicable to this podcast about Winston Churchill that I didn't know before is that Winston Churchill was a journalist.
Really?
And Winston Churchill became famous because he was paid a ton of money at the time, by the British government to be a war correspondent for the Boer Wars in Africa.
I did not know that.
And he was taken prisoner and became a prisoner of war. And then in some, only Winston Churchill fashion escaped and was one of a handful of people to make it out, gets back to England. And that's kind of what propelled him to fame, sort of. And that's, when he started his political career. But he was a journalist. I had no idea.
I had no idea either. Wow. This is what's so great about this podcast. You learn some things that you wouldn't expect sometimes. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Final thoughts, Jesse. What key points would you like our listeners to take from today's interview?
Well, if you're not, definitely, if you are a PIO, especially, just for professional development, you need this, but especially if you are a smaller agency, one to two person shop, you have to be connected with other PIOs. You can do that through NIOA. You can do that through a handful of things. I'm obviously going to advocate. I'm the vice chair for IACP's PIO section, so I'm going to advocate for that. Maybe I know everybody has region groups of PIOs, but you have to be connected with other PIOs, just to get different perspective, but also to have those people. Like I said, I have right now 15 people. I have multiple group chats, but I have 15 people that if we had an absolutely crazy thing happen here in Dallas, immediately people that I can call for help. And as a PIO, you have to have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Anything else you'd like to add?
Get into the science. Don't be afraid to get into the science of how you're reaching people on social media. But like with anything, this is not a one size fits all or one solution. And you cannot become tunnel visioned. You cannot become tunnel vision with hey, I'm going to look at all this analytical data about social media. You have to still be broad in your approach.
Absolutely. How can people best reach out to you if they want to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. So Best way is going to be my LinkedIn, Jesse Carr, JESSECARR. There is no I in my name. No I.
I will add that all into the show notes so they can connect with you.
And then on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it's all the same. It's Jesse D. Carr. And
all right, I will add all that into it.
Perfect.
Jesse, thank you very much for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Robert, thanks for having me.
And that's Jesse Carr, Senior Public Information Officer from Dallas PD. All right. That's all for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.